To see you here. We are studying practical Proverbs for everyday living. We are in Proverbs chapter 8 and 9. Dale filled in for me last week. I listened to some of that class, and that being the case, you'll take with a grain of salt anything I'm going to say from Proverbs on parenting. I heard about the carabiner story when I remember I lived through that when he was hanging literally from the rafters. I never saw that. That happened when I was at work, so I can't take credit for anything but the genetics of that. No, I just said the genetics. It's funny that there's two types of preacher's kids. I guess you know that, right? We're both preacher's kids. There are the preacher's kids that give their family, their parents a fit, and then there's the perfect child. You can guess which was who in our couple. And so she had to reap a lot of what I sowed, especially with the Lord giving us 3 boys. And so all she had was sisters, so she didn't know about that. Anyway, we're not talking about parenting today, so maybe you'll forget some of those things by the time that comes around. We are looking at, in Proverbs chapter 8 and chapter 9, Solomon trying one more strategy before he gets into a change of approach. Now, when we look at what Proverbs is or purports itself to be, what's happening in Proverbs? Who's the speaker? Who wrote Proverbs? Most of them. Solomon. Okay, so who is his primary audience? Particularly, although he doesn't do so in the second part, in the first 9 chapters, who is he addressing it to? It's who? His son. He does occasionally say son. Solomon did have multiple children, multiple sons. Some have wondered if it's Rehoboam. Rehoboam is going to be his successor on the throne of Israel. It's going to be during Rehoboam's reign that the kingdom divides. If Rehoboam was the primary target, then he missed a lot of what his father had to say. But when we think about Solomon, Solomon doesn't come to this completely with a clean slate or legitimate source for a lot of what he has to say. A lot of his example is going to overshadow what he's going to try to tell his son. It is an awfully hard thing for us to do, to tell our children, do as I say and not as I do. Because our example is going to scream a whole lot louder than even when we raise our voices. And so Solomon yet has a message that's coming from where? What's the source of Solomon's message? The Lord. The Spirit of God is speaking through him. And so it's good stuff. And you think that his son picks up on that. Now, what Solomon does in these first 9 chapters is he is trying different strategies. He is hitting some various topics. And what he is doing in the first 9 chapters is there are 15 discourses. Now, a discourse is simply a discussion. So, in lengthy discussions, he is talking about some major things. So you notice that our classes to this point have been kind of textual. We've broken down big sections of text. And in those sections, you have Solomon talking about being industrious, or Solomon talking about what kind of a woman he should look for that's a righteous woman. He himself being one who listens to instruction, listen to your parents. Be aware that your peers are going to have another message, and it may not be the message that is going to help you, even though it's going to suggest that it does. Now, what he does in Proverbs 8 and 9 is a completely different tack. He is going to engage in something, and I don't know how many of you guys enjoy literary things. I think there are 2 types of people. There are English and history people, and there are math and science people. I'm an English history person. I know I'm speaking to some math and science folks in here. But even with this, there are certain things about it I didn't enjoy. They're literary devices. I remember having to study in school. Metaphors. Did y'all study those in school? What's a metaphor? Okay, all right. Are you a math science person?
Yeah.
Okay, but but you had to go through school, so that's pretty good. It's comparison, and actually, sometimes it's more strongly put, right? It's something is something else, right? As a literary device, but it does break down to be a comparison. So similes would be what? Like or as, right? There are allegories where you have figures, stories, in which a point is being told through the story. The Bible has one of those in the New Testament in Galatians chapter 4. What Solomon does in Proverbs 8 and 9 is he uses personification. What is personification? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Giving human qualities to something that's not human.
All right, I couldn't do any better than that. Some abstract quality is given human quality. So you think about how often we do that in society. For some reason, we like to do that with women. Boats are personified with a woman's name, or rivers, or cars. I think one of the better cultural examples right now is the Allstate commercials. Mayhem, right? Mayhem is personified as a guy who's wreaking havoc at the ball field and on the highways and in houses and so forth. And so Solomon is going to pull a page from the personification playbook, and he is going to present wisdom as a woman. So look at Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 1. He personifies wisdom, and he begins with two rhetorical questions. Somebody read Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 1.
Doesn't wisdom call out? Doesn't understanding make her voice heard?
All right, so these are two rhetorical questions. What's the answer to both of them? Does wisdom call out? Yes. Can you hear her voice? Now, I want you to think about putting that in the context of what Solomon would have heard and how it would be for us. Do you hear wisdom every day? Does wisdom call out to you? And if so, where do you find it? Where do you hear it on a day-by-day basis?
Other people, the word.
Okay. All right, so other people. And we're going to talk about how do you know. How do you know if what you're hearing from other people is wisdom? Because in the information age, we are bombarded with messaging. It is literally, and really, it has changed a lot in the last 3 to 5 years. With the blowing up of the podcast platforms and with YouTube, you just think about and the polarization of our country, where you have two sides that are affirming with loud voices, and the question is wisdom in one or the other of those? And so we have to discern from the others that we're listening to, because you may find some wisdom and some foolishness in both places. Where else do you hear wisdom every day? Where else does wisdom cry out to you from?
Bible.
All right, the Bible. All right, so it's, you may have an audio Bible where you can hear it literally, but the idea is you've got to go to a source where you can find wisdom. And so Solomon is going to highlight wisdom and her qualities. All right? I want you to think about, we're going to read Proverbs 8 and 9 together. I want you to think about Solomon's strategy. Is saying, all right, son, here are two women. That's what he's doing. One that I'm going to talk about the most, because I kind of alluded to her ways in some of the chapters that preceded this. One is wisdom. Okay, she has an appearance, she has qualities, and she is presenting herself. She's calling out to you as your potential suitor. She wants to be your mate. She wants you to cherish her. And then he's going to give a little bit of attention at the end of this discourse section in Proverbs chapter 9, literally the last 6 verses of this portion of Proverbs. And he's going to say, here's folly. She is also calling out to you. She's as loud as wisdom is, and she's got a message she wants you to hear, and she wants you to adore her. Maybe that seems a little strange to us, that Solomon would use that particular strategy or approach, but it's what he does, and God moves him to do that. Now, before we get into the particulars, we find ourselves, remember this class is practical wisdom for daily living. Your task is to explain to a world that has need of it, what is the difference between wisdom and folly? How would you explain from a biblical framework to somebody that you would meet every day the difference between wisdom and folly? And I'll let you do that however you want to do it.
What was that?
What is the difference between wisdom and folly? How would you explain that to somebody, especially without a biblical worldview?
Day and night.
Okay, that doesn't really help me though. How do I process that? How do I use that? What is wisdom? Okay, good judgment. Let's try to find maybe this foolishness and folly. Let's just say poor judgment. All right? Give me an area where that might be important. Good judgment, bad judgment. You see it all the time. In what areas?
Finance.
Okay, finance, that was one that came top of my mind.
Business ethics.
Okay. Can I broaden that to just ethics in general?
Sure.
All right, but certainly business ethics.
Scottsville Road.
No, there is no wisdom on Scottsville Road.
Except when we're on it, right? I mean, other than us.
You're in folly if you
Hey, I moved here from Denver, and when we first moved here, people were saying, man, Scottsville Road is terrible. I'm like, yeah. Going down I-25. You know what? Sometimes I say, give me Denver, because Scottsville Road is maddening. And you've been sitting there for 4 minutes, and the light turns green, and then that poor person who's been waiting 4 minutes with you takes 20 seconds to wake up and start driving forward. Right? So, okay. All right, good judgment, bad judgment. Brittany will accept that as a great illustration of that.
You're welcome.
All right, what else? Wisdom, folly. How would you explain it? They'd never forget the Scottsville Road illustration, I'm sure.
Wisdom sometimes comes from past experience of failures.
Okay. Learning from experience. And I love that you said that, Cody. Success and failure. All right. And then by contrast, as we know the proverbial definition of insanity, right? Okay. What else? And by the way, I think you're doing a great job, because the temptation would be for us to run in our first place to the Bible. We're going to do that as we walk through Proverbs 8 and 9. But this helps people because this is where we live each and every day. Folks understand that. All right, so good judgment, learning from experience. Any other contrasts you'd lay out for people?
Following the thought through to potential consequences downstream. So.
Okay, I'm going to call that discernment and understanding. And what's interesting is that Solomon does that in Proverbs chapter 8 and 9, and failure in that regard. Okay? All right, so we're talking about principles, by the way, individuals get from God's Word and God's guidance. You think about all of that and all that Scripture has to say about that, and especially in the book of Proverbs. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to look in two different directions this morning, and that's all we have. This is chapter 8. Wisdom addresses the public. And I want us to just notice as we look through here, Proverbs chapter 8, verse 1 beginning says, "Does not wisdom call, and understanding lift up her voice? On top of the heights, beside the way, where the paths meet, she makes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out." So as Solomon personifies wisdom as a woman, she's standing on a mountaintop. She's standing at the city gate. So it's not like she's hard to find and she's a recluse in a cave somewhere. She's out there where everybody has access to her. And so the question that Solomon is asking without asking it is, what is she saying? What is her message to his son? So he's trying to draw the picture of this ideal woman, wisdom, and she's talking to him. She is there where he can hear her, and he wants his son to be able to distinguish her voice from folly. So that's where we're going to go from there. Notice, first of all, her message in verse 4 through 9. So if somebody will read verse 4 through verse 9. Proverbs chapter 8.
To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools, learn sense. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. For my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them.
Okay, read verse 9 as well.
They are all straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge.
Okay, so she's talking about what she has to say. So what's her message to Solomon's son in verse 4 through 9? If you were to boil it down, what's she saying to him?
Speaks the truth.
Okay? And because she speaks the truth, what should Solomon's son's response be toward her? If somebody, do you know people in your life who, when they speak, you have a hard time believing them? You don't know if they're giving you the full story or not. You don't know if it's going to pan out to be what they say. Or somebody who gives you their word and you have no idea if they're going to follow through on it. Now, you have that picture. You probably have a face in your mind. Think about the contrast to that. You know somebody who, if they tell you, you can count on it. You don't even give it a second thought. You don't worry about it because you know it's going to get covered. All right? So what is the word that we would use for somebody who's speaking the truth and we know that they're speaking the truth? What do you have for them? Trust. I believe that's her first message to Solomon's son is trust me. And why should we trust wisdom according to the text? It's right there. Notice with me. Go back to verse 6 and verse 7. She speaks noble and right things. She speaks only the truth and never wickedness. You can count on that. All right? Number 2, she utters only the things that are right. It's never crooked. It's never perverse. Verse 8. Hers is a way that's right and is never going to be wrong. Verse 9. Now, here's the balancing act that we have to struggle with in the current culture. It's the balance between becoming naive and being a hypercritical cynic. Now, all of you are tending one of those two ways. And I'll tell you what happened. When I was younger, I used to be a lot more gullible. I mean, as a young married person, was it Cody that said, we learn from our experiences, successes, and failures? I trusted some of the wrong people, and I learned the hard way that some things weren't what they were stated to be. We do that when we are making business decisions in our own household, when we are maybe investing in some particular area. We learn about those things. And so what can happen as you get older is you become a cynic. And maybe you don't have to get that to be that old. And you don't trust anything that anybody has to say. And so this skill is something we're always working on. We're trying to find a balance between those two things. And it can be harder the older you get to open up your heart and to trust people. But no matter where you find yourself, you have got to exercise this skill set, and wisdom helps you to do that. So here's where I think the balancing line is. It's what Scripture tells us in passages like Acts chapter 17 verse 11. On that occasion, Paul has just left the folks in Thessalonica. He preached there for 3 weeks. The Jews drive them out, and they have to go somewhere else on their missionary journey. This is the second journey. They go to Berea. And we don't know much about the Bereans, but you might know something about them. Acts chapter 17 and verse 11 says that these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica. Why? You remember the second part of that verse? They searched the Scriptures daily to see if those things were so. Who's the source of the message that they're checking up on? Paul. Who's Paul? He's an apostle. Where's his message coming from? From God himself. And so they're not shutting him out. They're not saying, you're just another, shyster, another charlatan, just like the others that we've heard here. They're taking the Scriptures, the Old Testament Scriptures, and they're checking behind him to see if those things are so. And I think it's interesting that Paul to the church of Thessalonica is going to turn around at about the same period of time. And in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21, he says, examine everything carefully. Now, that's hard. It's especially harder when there's a proliferation of messages. You're hearing more and more all the time, even in these various areas that we've been talking about. And your parents and grandparents may tell you this if you're married and have children. What is your approach to be with disciplining your children? What's conventional wisdom, current wisdom say? I'm really asking because I've got 5 grandchildren, and we haven't had a philosophical discussion yet about their parental approach. But I'm not saying what yours is, but what is generally speaking, because I know you guys are like doing all the research. I remember Kathy, we had the what to expect when you're expecting books, and then all the child rearing books, and so there's all this current wisdom, and we didn't have the internet like it is now, right? And so you have all the different social media platforms, and help me out. What is the prevailing message about how you raise kids?
Gentle parenting.
Gentle parenting. Okay, help me with that. What's gentle parenting?
Dumb.
Well, like I said, I don't want to debate it out in class.
Not letting them feel their emotions, not like spanking them like we did back in the day, not letting them feel their emotions and
Talking things
Okay. Talking things through, let them feel their emotions.
It's child-led.
It's what?
Child-led also.
That's a good way to put it.
Child-led.
Child-led. Okay. All right. So, look, you guys, we raised our kids early on in Virginia, the D.C. corridor. All right, so a very progressive area. We moved to Denver, a very progressive area. They weren't calling them these things. I don't know if it was as structured as all of that, but you have cultural pressure, and then you have peer pressure in your community. So if you're at church, there are other parents who are trying to figure this out along the same time that you are. And just like any other parental strategy, you've got to use wisdom and say, is this trustworthy? How are you going to determine? And again, I'm happy to tell you my feeling about gentle parenting if you want to hear that. But how do you figure out if that's the way to go or not? Okay, you can try to see if it works. What's the risk with trying it and see it works? The kids like it. The parents don't like so much the result of that, right? Yeah.
And you can just look at the kids that we have now and say, is this how I want my kids to grow up? Because I don't have kids myself, but as a teacher, I see a lot of this. I've never heard gentle parenting, but like it's kind of seeking to almost be a kid's friend. I think a lot of these parents either kind of don't interact with their kids as much as they should, or they interact with them too much in an inappropriate way as far as the parent and child dynamic is more of a friendship. And so you can look to other examples, kind of like we said with experience, maybe not your experience, but what you see in mainstream media or with your job or maybe your friends' kids and see how that turned out for them, if that's something you want and
so
not want.
There's always somebody who is a lap or two ahead of you on the track of life, right? And you can kind of see how that's going. How is that working for them? And you don't necessarily have to come with that hypercritical cynicism, but to dialogue and ask, hey, what are you guys doing? Now, you don't take that and go and talk to somebody like-minded and say, boy, let me tell you what they're doing. It's not working. But just, because we get one shot at it, right? We get one shot to raise our children. It's a priority. It's important. And so the point is we're going to use wisdom. Now, by the way, Proverbs has some things to say about, perhaps, in contradistinction from a style like gentle parenting.
You could just read the parenting manual and pray it.
Yeah, well, you can, and it's there. And yet, what Solomon is saying here is the wisdom that he's in the midst of by the Spirit of God, writing down and preserving. He is saying it's there, and wisdom is saying, "Trust me." Now, let's just stay with that analogy just a little bit longer. If your parental style is consistent, disciplined with love, and yet a firm standard, right? Where if it's wrong today, it's wrong tomorrow, and it's wrong the day after that. If any of you are trying that experiment, is that easy? Do you have to go to the same well repeatedly? And maybe you feel, and look, here's the thing. Parenting is one of those areas where you constantly feel like, man, I'm struggling to get this figured out. Is this working? Is this right? Because I'm trying to follow what seems to be the way to do this, and I'm doing it from my imperfect position. Is this working or not? And it may be what you have to do is talk to somebody who is trying that, and they're a couple of laps ahead of you, and you see that eventually those principles get instilled. And you always are checking yourself. And by the way, for all of you who are parents or will be parents, I'm sure you've heard this from folks further down the road. You're going to all look back and say, I blew it here and over there. I wish I could go back and do it differently. I made mistakes. But there is a general approach in every area of life that's proven by wisdom, and wisdom says, trust me. Here's what John says, try the spirits, whether they are from God, for there are many false prophets that have gone out into the world. We think about that with regard to doctrine, how to worship, what the plan of salvation is, but it applies to every area of life. And Solomon is saying, wisdom cries out and says, trust me. Here's what Jesus says, take heed how you hear. Luke 8 and verse 18. All right, so what will help with that is what the Hebrews writer says. And I think one of you mentioned this on that third one down there. He is saying that spiritual maturity involves those who by reason of practice have their senses exercised to discern good and evil. So whatever area of life we're talking about, judge it by its fruits. Matthew 7, verse 15 through 20. Now, Landon said the manual's right in front of us. That's true. Wisdom's not the same thing as Scripture. Scripture is wisdom, but wisdom is more than Scripture, right? How do they differ? I think one of your answers is even there.
You can know the scripture but not doing it. It's wisdom is
Okay, so as we often say, I think we said this in an earlier class, wisdom is the proper application of knowledge. It's right there, and I can know it. But when I say bedtime is at 8 o'clock and it's 9:30 and we're having that wrestling match, I've got to figure out what my strategy is.
Don't negotiate chairs.
No, hey, law enforcement has taught us that, so there's something to be said. Now, here's the thing. Culture is constantly trying to tell us what's right and wise, and God is often countering that message with truth. Now, some of the things that we're told by the culture, by our peers, are great. Some of them are neutral. Some of them are downright wrong and evil. And so wisdom all the time, from the mountaintop and from the city gate, is crying out to us. We've got to make decisions. They may not be popular with our children. It's staying with this analogy. They may not be popular with our peers, with our co-workers, wherever it is. But only wisdom can help us to figure out what bucket to put the messages that we hear into. All right, so that's, again, let's don't miss the picture of what Solomon's doing here. He's saying, here's this virtuous, beautiful woman. By the way, he's going to come back to a real virtual woman at the end of Proverbs 31. And just a question before we move to the second message from wisdom, why a woman, why not a man? I mean, I guess on one level, Solomon's speaking to his son, not his daughter.
So there is that element.
But that's a very important one. Do you think there's anything else at play?
It's supposed to be a union. So there's a union of the man and the woman.
Okay.
I mean, you're assuming we're going to be disappointed with Christ, right? Where it's talking about how he's there at the beginning and all that stuff.
We'll look at that.
There's not a clear-cut answer as to why it's a woman, other than, he's talking to the son. But
So we can talk about the difference between a man and a woman, right? Men are, I use it whenever there's counseling, premarital counseling or marital counseling, and someone comes in and we're talking about conflict. And we talk about left brain and right brain. Who is it that is suggested is a right brain thinker? Okay, let me say it a different way. Sometimes we say that one gender thinks more with a rational or intellectual approach. I'm not saying it's true, but this is what it said. And one side thinks emotional. Have you heard that? Now, that's not my message, but is that what you heard? Listen, here's what I tell folks in counseling. Guys are more, they think more from an intellectual, rational viewpoint. But do you know why, guys, you always lose fights? You're only using half your brain. Women use both sides. Women think rationally and emotionally. And so you got one arm behind your back. Now, I've never met the guy who says, yeah, when we have arguments, I'm always right. No, we may say that. We don't say that in the conflict. And we often find ourselves going, man, how did I lose again? You know, I'm 0 in 1,000, and my wife's 1,000 and 0. How does it work out that way? It's because you don't bring your whole brain to the fight, and she does. Wisdom is an all-encompassing, perfect quality, right? Ladies, don't make too much of that analogy, but I think that's another reason why. All right, let's look at verse 10 and 11. Proverbs 8, 10, and 11. Somebody read that for us.
Receive my instruction and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things one may desire cannot be compared with her.
Okay, so what's the message here? What's wisdom's message to Solomon's son?
Wisdom is valuable.
Okay, she's saying value me, right? And he's going to come back to this particular message later on. Prosperity is with her, verse 18 through 21. She's better than wealth because she blesses by being right and just. He's going to say that toward the end of this. And we've got to think more than in monetary terms. If we just think in those ways, then we're missing the message. It does, as you have said up here, somebody did over there on the poor judgment side, it does impact the financial side of life, but she offers something better than material prosperity. She yields qualities of character that are of higher value than gold or silver and other treasures. And Bible writers remind us that this is important because at their best, monetary blessings disappoint. If this were not the case, at least on some level, then the happiest people that we would ever meet in the world would be the wealthiest. And the most miserable people that we would ever encounter would be those who had next to nothing. And we have some shared experiences, some unique. I've been in third world countries, and I have seen people who make $2 a day, who exude much more joy over the course of my knowing them over a long period of time than folks who have amassed incredible amounts of wealth. Now, can one have both? Ideally, even, could we say that this would not be a bad aspiration if we can keep things in their proper perspective. There's no problem with that, right? Again, in counseling, sometimes I come to 1 Timothy chapter 6, and I do a true or false test. True or false? Money is the root of all evil. False. What does he say? The love of money. Money, neutral commodity, great servant, terrible master. And so Jesus tells us this with regard to having our values, our head on straight. He says, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. Don't let that be your primary focus of emphasis, where moth and rust corrupt and where thieves break through and steal, but rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where those things don't happen. For where your treasure is, there your heart is going to be also. Paul says those who put their primary value on material things are going to pierce themselves through with many sorrows. They're going to be run through with ruin and destruction. 1 Timothy chapter 6, 9 and 10. And then in verse 17 he says, instruct those who are rich not to put their trust in the uncertainty of riches. And then Peter says this in 2 Peter 3, 10 and 11. The day of the Lord is going to come as a thief in the night. What's going to happen to the stuff?
Gone in the twinkling of an eye.
Okay, it's going to be burned up. He says, seeing that all these things are going to be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in all holiness and godliness, 2 Peter 3, 10 and 11. So is wisdom preaching to us that we take a vow of poverty and give all of our possessions to feed the poor? Could he? Did she ever? You remember an instance where wisdom's message was, go and sell all your possessions and give to the poor? And come and follow me. You'll have treasure in heaven. It was that rich guy, right? In Matthew chapter 19. What's the point there? If it keeps me from being wise, if it keeps me from being righteous, if it keeps me from being just, if it keeps me from being faithful to God, if that's what I've got to do in order to right my ship spiritually, then I'll do that. But the idea is I'm going to put things in their proper perspective. Wisdom's calling out and is saying, don't ever sacrifice me in order to value what's going to go poof at the end, right? Okay, number 3, let's go to verse 12 through 21. Somebody if you would quickly read that for us. 12 through 21.
Wisdom dwell with prudence and find out knowledge and discernment. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogance and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate. Counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding, I have strength. By me kings reign and rulers decree justice. By me princes rule and nobles, all the judges of the earth. I love those who love me, and those who diligently will find me. Those who seek me will diligently find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring riches and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, yes, than fine gold, and my revenue than choice silver. I traverse the way of righteousness in the midst of the path of justice, that I may cause those who love me to inherit wealth, and that I may fill their treasuries.
Okay, so what's the bottom line? What's her message here? 12 through 21. What does she do? You name it. Where do you lack? Where would you like to improve? What's something that really has been a hurdle for you to climb? You think about whatever that is in your mind. How will you get there? You've got to use her. And so she is saying, I want you to use me. It keeps you off the path that God hates, verse 13. It owns every resource that you need, verse 14. It is the same as understanding, verse 14. Kings use her. Leaders use her. Rich individuals use her to get what matters the most, verse 17 through 21. The folks who have success in their jobs, their families, their finances, and their relationships are those who use her, and the Lord blesses those who seek her. Jesus says in Matthew 7, in the Sermon on the Mount, ask and it shall be given unto you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asks receives, and he that seeks finds, and the one that knocks to him, it's open. So she's saying, use me. Now, you heard Dale tell those stories last week from his childhood, and so you are not surprised probably that Kathy and I repeatedly said, use your head, more than we can remember. And you're going to find yourself in those relationships saying those things, and that's what Solomon says is happening when you use wisdom. You're using your head. All right, and then in verse 22 through 31, her message is, know me. Landon alluded to this a moment ago in verse 22 through 31. In summary, it appears that wisdom is saying, God made me. This is kind of before Genesis 1:1. God made me, and then God and I, this is a personification, we made everything else. God used me to create everything. Now, there is an analogy we're going to make where I don't want you to read into that because from the ancient Jewish times, people took Proverbs chapter 8 and they applied wisdom to who? Landon, you said it. Who did the Jews see this wisdom as? Christ. Jesus. Everything that is said about wisdom is said about Jesus. And that's why I say that's where the analogy breaks down, because Jesus is not a created being. But other than that, everything that's said about wisdom in this chapter is said about Jesus. And we'll see that in just a moment. But what Jesus says is, know me. Know what I did. Look at how God felt about me when we were involved in the creation. That He took notice of me. We rejoiced and took delight. There's all these accommodations. And this is the one that God used to create, that Solomon says she wants to be joined to you. She wants to be your woman. She wants to be the one that you walk through life with. How could you not do this? And then the last thing he says is, follow me. In verse 32 through 36, she says, listen to me, keep my ways, find me, find favor, sin against me, and you hate yourself. All right? He ends by saying, wisdom knows the way to life and how to avoid death. Now, perhaps this has been a little bit more of a tedious walkthrough. This is the way Solomon chose to approach this part of the Revelation of the book of Proverbs. This is the 14th discourse, the 14th discussion. It's a lengthy discussion. There are 15 of these in the first 9 chapters. Proverbs chapter 9 is the last one. And yet it's remarkable that the author's father had full access to all of this and didn't do it. The author himself, and all that he's telling his son, he didn't follow. His son is going to be a massive failure. And is going to reject her and is going to, in a very decisive move, choose folly, the woman, at the end of Proverbs chapter 9, verse 13 through 18. Your teacher has more often than he would like not chosen her. Here it is, in black and white. And yet we miss it. Now, I want to take the last minute or two to show you the comparison between wisdom and Jesus. Jesus is wisdom incarnate. Isaiah the prophet incarnate means in the flesh. In Isaiah 11 and verse 2 it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, a spirit of wisdom and understanding. And when you see Jesus in the flesh, you see everything that Proverbs 8 says about wisdom is true of Jesus. Start with the first 5 verses. Wisdom and Jesus call out to you. All right, verse 1 through 5. What's Jesus' call? How does he call out to us? Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Come unto me, and I will give you rest. Wisdom in Jesus should be treasured. Verse 6 through 11. Paul would say to the Colossians in Colossians 2:3, in him all the wisdom of treasures are found embodied. Wisdom and Jesus teach you to humbly fear God. Verse 12 and 13. And Jesus, one of his messages that he taught by example is to serve that greatness comes through humility. Matthew 20, verse 25 through 28. Wisdom and Jesus offer you success. Verse 14 through 16. Wisdom in Jesus offers great rewards. Verse 17 through 21. Peter says it's an inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, that fades not away, reserved in heaven for you. Wisdom and Jesus display their glory in creation. Verse 22 through 31. And Paul says in Colossians 1:16, without him was not anything made that was made. And he mentions every sphere in every realm that he's involved in that. And then wisdom and Jesus will bless your life. That's the last 5 verses of the chapter. John 14:6. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. All right, so starting next week, we get into the more topical approach to Proverbs, where we start looking at some of the great things of Proverbs, and we're going to see how that can help us in our daily walk as adults, as married couples, as parents, and as those who are trying to build success in our career and our relationship. All right, thanks very much for your attention.